Have you ever wanted to learn how to service your Penn Spinfisher V live liner yourself so you don't have to pay someone else to do it? Well, in today's video, I'll show you how to do just that. What is up, guys and gals? Today we're going to learn how to break down, service, and reassemble our Penn Spinfisher V 8500 live liner with some tips and tricks along the way. Now, before we get started on that, we're going to pull up a schematic on it just so we have an exploded view of the parts that go inside here, but also the part numbers in case we need to order anything. This particular reel did need some parts for repair. So that being said, let's just go ahead and pull the spool off so we don't have it in the way, and then we'll work on the rest of the reel. First, I'm going to start by taking that handle off. I'm going to go counterclockwise that direction to remove it. And I think the first thing I will show you is this. All right, for the handle, all we're going to do is take off this or remove that pivot screw right there, just by backing it up. We'll pull that out, and the reason we do that is because we want to stick in here some grease so it doesn't get frozen. And I also like to stick some right at that opening right there. It transfers over into the threads over there. But at the same time, we can also grease here inside that and just all around it, plus the threads right there. On the knob, there's not a whole lot to do. You can add some oil right there. You could open that up and put some oil down there as well, but it's not necessary. Then you just kind of work that in. Then we're just going to stick this back on. And when I'm done sticking this back on, I'm going to add some grease to that threads right there. And this is for when it goes inside the main gear. We don't want to have anything where it freezes up or locks up inside there. And that's pretty much all we'll do for the handle. Now to get inside this reel, we're going to work that shaft up first to remove these two little things right here. It's kind of rock as I pull it up. You'll have a metal washer on the bottom, and you might have a variation of a number of plastic washers above it. Now we're going to take that screw out. We're going to back that nut up so we can remove this rotor. Now we're just going to keep those things together. Now to pull this up, you're going to rock as you pull up. And let's start with the rotor first. We're going to work on the line roller and that bail spring assembly. First, we're going to pop this off. Kind of get that out of the way. And now we're going to do a few screws around here. I'm going to loosen everything first. And the side we're going to start with is this side. There's nothing under here. We're just going to remove it. And those screws, this one on this side and this one on this side, pretty sure they're the same size, so let's not worry about those. Now you can take this, turn it sideways and pull it off. Now we'll get over here. When I get here, I kind of hold or support the bail arm with both fingers, my index and my thumb, and then back this screw up. The reason you do that is because there is a spring-loaded mechanism under there that can cause this to spring up on you. And we're just verifying that the both screws are the same size. Now I'm going to gently lift up and show you what I'm talking about. Under there you'll see that spring kind of rise up right there. Let's go ahead and open this up so we can see what's under there. Now we see we have a spring with a pivot arm and we have a trip arm, and that's pretty much all we have. Now to break this line roller down, we're going to remove that screw that I loosened earlier. Pull that out, and we're going to gently pull this off so you can see what's underneath there. You have the bail arm, this metal piece, there's a plastic washer on there. I'm going to pull this off. There's a ball bearing right there, and that's all we have. Now you can see these things are not dirty at all, and I I think I cleaned these things up already, that's why. But if we were to clean these things up, you could certainly use some corrosion X to spray in here, break down any dried up grease that may be in there. Same for this side and inside the line roller and on the bail arm. And kind of use a Q-tip or some paper towels like so to kind of wipe those things out. I typically also use a toothbrush to kind of get in those little nooks and crannies that my toothpick, I'm sorry, not toothpick, but my Q-tip does not get into. One thing I will do is test this line roller, and there we go. It's not moving at all. All right, let me grab a new bearing and I'll come right back to you guys. Okay, here's the new bearing. We're gonna go ahead and oil that. Let that soak in a little bit. You could also turn it to let it kind of work its way down inside there. What I'm going to show you now are places that I would grease on here. So I would grease right around there on the line roller or the bail wire, around the post, and some inside that hole right there where the screw is going to go. You can also grease this end, but typically I like to do a combination of grease and corrosion X with it, but you can just use any kind of regular oil. Well, not regular oil, but fishing reel oil. It just helps thin that out a little bit so it's easier to spin. And you can just kind of follow along as I'm doing what I'm doing here. I'll throw little tidbits in here and there. Typically for this, I will grease the pivot arm, but I will not grease the bail spring. And don't ask me why, because I really don't know. I'm gonna hit that post right there. And also that little hole right there, that's going to receive that pivot arm right there off of that bail spring. And there's a little theme happening here. If you've noticed, I like to grease all the metal pieces, especially metal on metal friction. I like to grease those things up. And I think, that's it for that. So for the rotor, we're gonna grease under here, that bottom, inside that channel, top right here, over those holes where one of the lock screws will go, around that post. That gets quite a bit of friction if you were interested. In those little grooves or channels right there. For this side, I'm gonna grease right there where that trip arm will go, kind of all the way down. The back side of where that spring sits, and around this post also. And I think that's all we'll do here. I'm wrong, there's one more thing I would grease, and that would be well, there's two more things. Inside this line roller, and after the oil has seeped into this bearing, I will also grease the bearing, and that helps protect it from salt or fresh water also intrusion. Kind of want to protect that as best we can. That sees a lot of water because of the line constantly going past it. So now we'll take our bearing, stick that on first. This line roller only goes on one way to receive that bearing, so you're fine. You can't put it on the other side. This little washer will stick on there, but if it falls off, you can stick it on here. Push that in through the gap and let it sit looking like that. Now I'm going to take this, just balance it over it, and insert this line roller screw. Now we have that tight, but we don't want it all the way down, so we're going to back this up just a little bit so we have some play in it. This is what I'm looking for right there. That's only for when we put this bail arm back on. If we need a little bit of play somewhere, at least I have it. Now we can take this, stick that on there. I'm just going to kind of work that in. And that's good. Now let's head over to the bail spring and the trip arm section. We're going to take our trip arm, put that in first. That longer section will be going in, like so. And I'm just going to kind of push that all the way to the top to make sure it's as high as it can go. And now for the bail spring, there's a smaller end on, there may be a smaller end, let me not say there is. If there is a smaller end, stick this arm through it. Then I'm going to rest that right there, looking like that. Of course, it's going to pop out now because there's no cover on it, but we're going to get that fixed. Just put the cover over it and then screw that in. I'm going to go all the way down on this, but there is a possibility I will need some room, and if I do, I will back this up slightly to let the cover have some play in it. But for now, we'll leave it snug down. Now, all we're going to do is take that arm off the bail spring assembly, have that kind of facing up like that, insert it into that hole right there. So looking like that. Let's see, I can show you this way. Like so. And now I'm going to take this assembly, push at an angle and down, kind of rocking as I go. We got to stop somewhere. Hold on one second. What's happening there is I need a little bit of room here, so I'm going to lift this up just a little bit. Start that over again. Stick it in the hole. And then we're going to work our way down over that post. And you kind of feel it drop in place when it happens. But you can also test it by holding on to the bail arm, not letting it lift up, and feeling the tension there and having it spring back on you. Now we can go ahead and lock this down with one of the screws. And that's good enough. It's not going to go anywhere. And I will just snug it down. Now for this side, we'll just flop it over and secure it. Now let's go ahead and finish up by closing this down, since we loosened up a little bit, and tightening this down as well. And one important reason for leaving this section right here a little loose is because sometimes this point right here on the bail wire will rotate or flex up, or kind of curved up and down to sit properly so it flips properly. So it's always good to leave that loose until the final screw needs to be nailed down, which will be this one. And that looks good. Now we come to the body of the reel. We're going to remove this side plate first, and then we'll go to the pinion stack afterward. To do so, we're going to remove that screw right there. Then we'll just kind of flick this piece up. I'm going to gently use my screwdriver to get in there, like so. Then we have a washer or a gasket under there. We can lift that up right now if we want to. And now we can remove those 4 screws on the outside. Now, before we go any further, we're going to go ahead and turn this pinion stack. Try to reset that, but I'll show you how it looked before. We're going to turn this until it goes to the bottom of the oscillation so that we can access the locking mechanism for the block on there. So let's lift this up if we can. And you want to be a little careful doing that because there's a rubber seal all the way around it. We're going to go ahead and pop that out. And you got to be a little gentle. Typically when you first open this reel up after it's been sealed for a while, this little rubber seal will be really set in that groove right there. So you want to work around with your screwdriver gently to get the entire thing up. This one's already been removed, so I know it's pretty good to go. Now we want to undo that screw right there to get that shaft out. And all we're going to do now is just kind of lift this piece up as we pull back. Kind of like so. And out that shaft comes. I'm going to leave this with this so I don't mistake the pieces. Now since it's going to be flopping around, we're going to remove that block and pull this gear out. Now we can get to the top part, pull this piece off. There's a metal ring or metal spring around it. Gonna leave that on for now. And now we can undo that screw a little bit. But before we finish taking it off, we're gonna remove that E-clip right there. And the way we do that is we take a screwdriver, stick it in one of those little gaps right there, and twist backwards. And off it comes. Now you can lift that entire thing up. What you will see there is that there's a spring. I think I have a picture of that I can show you. And we'll take that shaft out. Now we can undo those 3 screws right there to remove the pinion stack. They're all the same size. And all we're gonna do is just pull straight up. Yeah, I went up and had cleaned this reel out because it was pretty nasty inside. I remember now. It's been a while since for the parts to come in, so that's why. Now if we look here, we'll see that this rotor brake is lifting up, and that's not a good thing. It's not terrible, but it's not good in the sense that when you open the bail wire up and try to crank the reel to flip the bail back over, this slows it down if it's raised too high. It has to be a certain level for it to not stick, essentially, the bail arm. So we're going to remove those 2 screws. And we will note that these screws are actually different sizes, but it doesn't mean that it has to be. Just make sure you put them back in the way they came out. So we have a short one over there, and then we have a longer one over here. Typically what you'll have is the longer one will go in where it has more of the body to go inside of, and this one is a shorter one because it has less of the body to go through. Now we can kind of lift this up. If it's not up all the way, which this one was, then you can kind of just work its way up, or you can just glue it the way it is. Just the part that's lifting up. All right, now we can go ahead and get that crosswind gear out of there by undoing that screw. And this is actually the only screw that looks like this, so it doesn't really get mistaken for something else. But I still like to keep everything kind of separate. In this reel, we're going to replace the main gear, the crosswind gear, I think the block as well, and the pinion gear. So there's a few things that we're replacing. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull this bearing out of there. All these bearings have been refurbished. I'll leave a link in my description of what I did to refurbish them. That shouldn't have been that tight, but it was. And I'm going to remove that cap right there. They've always been tight. This is just kind of how these reels are. One of the things I don't like, honestly. Okay, so before I move on to any other parts of the reel, I'm going to finish up with getting that one out as well. This bearing right here. All right, now before we get to this bottom side where the bait runner or live liner drag knob is, we're going to go ahead and finish breaking down this pinion stack, pulling these things off. And while I do that, as you can see, this reel is already cleaned, but what I did for this is I did use an ultrasonic cleaner. I did only use Dawn grease. I didn't use anything like the Purple Power or Purple Grease Remover stuff. I try not to use those things, but I did use a lot of elbow grease in this because there was a lot of pieces that had a lot of wear. And if you look at my channel, look for a Penn 6500 live liner, you'll see how bad these things can really get. And this was kind of like that, but it still can be cleaned up. So now we've broken this down. I want to check this anti-reverse clutch, and it looks okay, but it looks a little wet, if there's such a thing. You want some lubrication in there, but you don't want it too wet, or too oily. And this might just be some either grease or something like that. So we want to clean that off. So that's all you see me doing here. Now remember, I did say I did refurbish all these bearings already. What I am going to do is just add some oil to all of them right now. Even the two for the main gear. And I removed these seals because you don't really need them. They don't do a whole lot of protection, even though you think they do. People will tell you that they do, but they really don't. And I will work them in. If you did want to add some protection to that, you could add some grease to it. In this case, I think it's an unnecessary step, so we're not going to do that. All right, so let's set this to the side. We're finished with that stuff. And now I'll show you the drag down here. Basically what we're going to do is take a little metal piece that you see right there, and we're going to kind of just stick our screwdriver in there and pull backwards. Before we do that, I always like to make sure that this is all the way at the bottom of the tension, which this one already is, but it still can be a little tricky getting it out. So we just kind of go in and pop, in and pop, and you're trying to get to where there's a little gap right there that you can just flick out. And now I see a little gap there, and now as you can see, I'm pulling that out. I'm just kind of twisting as I go. Now we're at a larger gap, so we're going to use a bigger one just to kind of pull it out. And just note the orientation of that. We have this little, seems like a longer end on this side than this. That's how it's going to go back in. The most important thing is when you put that back in, you want these flat sides here, this side right here, and that other side flush against the frame. So it could just be visually to your eye that it looks off, but it may be the same. I didn't really measure it. Now we're just going to pull this out. Everything's come out, so that's good. I'll show you exactly what's in here. You have that washer on top. It goes between this and the frame. We're going to undo these 3 screws right here to get that gold piece off. Let's just pull everything out. Pull that off. That O-ring sits between this, or on top of this, and that rotor right there. I'm sorry, on the frame right there on the inside. Now we're going to pull this out. Some things will fall up from here, and I'll kind of show you the orientation when they do. That is a clicker right there. That's what it sits in, and I think that's all you have there. Now you have this little locking piece. It's meant to be there to add as a little ratchet or a little clicker against the ratchet inside that frame right there. To get that out, we're going to open it from this side. Stick a little pin in there and just kind of open it up. Or you could take your pick and just kind of open it up from right there. Just keep your finger over it so it doesn't go flying around on you. And then this comes out. What you will see on here is a little notch on one end. That notch will be facing or in line with that little slot right there on this piece. This metal washer came from the drag stack. You have a spring. You have that piece in there that you can just back out. And that's that. So let's go ahead and set this to the side, and then we'll get the rest of the reel broken down. Now let's go ahead and finish up this part of the reel. We just have this lever left to take off. We're going to do this screw here, like so. And we're going to pop this off first, then we're going to push up. I'm going to kind of keep my finger over here just so nothing kind of shoots up at me, but it really doesn't. Like that.
and then we just pull it straight up. Now this can come out like that. I really just kind of leave it just in, but note that if you did take it out, the way it's going to sit is looking like that, with that spring coming up through the bottom. Now the last piece we have here is going to be this side, and we're just going to do some screws here and let some things just kind of come out. That's the cover for this little ratchet right here. I'm going to lift it off to release whatever pressure is on there. Take this piece off, and then this, and we're going to have two pieces on there here plus a spring. You have that, which just kind of interacts with the actual lever itself, and this interacts with the live liner on the back of the main gear. That little spacer we have that comes from underneath. Then you have the spring. And I'll show you that spacer at the bottom just so you can see what's in it. If you look at the bottom of the spacer, you'll see that there's a little separation between that and the lip. And that is for that spring to kind of sit in and not get bound up. So it just rotates freely around that bottom area. So looking like, see if we can do it so you can see it. So essentially it'll be looking like that. And then this way it doesn't get bound up or tightened down or locked up by wrapping around the other part that would be squeezed with these pieces on top of it. Now the final piece we have is this on the back of the main gear. And to remove that, we're going to hover the tip of that screwdriver just above this plate right here. We're trying to remove this E-clip, this large E-clip. We're just going to stick it in either end and just twist gently. Now we can see that kind of came off. Now I'm going to push the rest of it off just slowly. And that should be good for it to come off. Pick that up. We can pick this up. We saw the spring kind of reset, and separate those two. And that's it. All right, so I think I told you before what I do to clean these reels up. This one I did use an ultrasonic cleaner with some Dawn grease, but again, you could use the purple solution that you get from one of the Home Depot or Lowe's or something. That helps break down the grease and the grime as well. But I did also use my toothbrush, and every once in a while I did also use a wire brush because it was necessary to ensure this thing was cleaned up properly. So I'll come right back to you guys, show you how to put all this stuff together after I grab the parts that I will be replacing. So I'll see you guys in a sec. Now the first thing we want to do is put this back onto the back side of this new main gear. And we want to add some sort of protection to this, but we want this to work as freely as possible, so we avoid using some grease here. And if you did, you can just use a light amount of grease, but you also need to use some oil to just thin it out. I'm going to add some oil just around certain places and kind of wipe that out with my fingers. This helps this mechanism just work easier versus struggling against the friction that adding grease can cause. So as I was showing you earlier, there's a larger prong on one end that's going to go inside this hole right here. Like so. Then you're going to have everything just kind of sit. And if you look on this side, you'll see another prong sticking up. It's a shorter one. That'll be going through the hole right there. So I'm going to lay it over it, find the hole, stick it over the prong, and then turn until I get it to drop in place, which is going to be right about there. Now what we see here is that this spring is kind of lifted up, and we don't want that. So all we're going to do at this point now is just kind of push it down, recess it as close to the bottom as possible. And now I'm going to take this E-clip and start from the back side. And the reason you do the back side is because this base, that back base right there of the E-clip, helps keep the part that wants to jump up in position. I'm going to stick it right there like that. And then you can use your pliers or something. I like to use my flathead screwdriver for this. Then just kind of push. It will take you a little bit of effort, but you want to constantly watch that spring underneath to make sure that it is not jumping up on you, which it doesn't look like this one did. And now we can test it to make sure it works, and we can see that it does. Now if we put that together, we're going to add a light amount of grease to the entire surface area of this. We want to protect it from the corrosion that can happen on these reels if they just sit and you don't use them or you don't clean them or service them. So I may just speed up through this, and then I'll stop at certain places where I might want to give you a little note or something. Now, when you get to the seal area, you can add a light amount of grease inside of it as well. But just notice that everything here is covered or lightly covered with grease. Now for these holes, I'm going to add some oil inside of them. And then we'll get to the top, and I'm going to slather a large amount of grease inside here. And sounds bad at first. It's not as bad as it sounds, but what I'm trying to note here is that you want to make sure this entire area is covered in grease so that that pinion stack does not get frozen in here. It is a tough thing to pull out. There's ways to do it, but it can become a nightmare. So I just over grease right here from experience. And we can just go ahead and oil these holes as well. Like that. Now let's go ahead and put this setup back in. First thing we're going to start with is this little screw right here. And we're going to take this screw with the nut, does not have the large head, stick it through the hole like so. So you have the top of the spring, or that side of the spring at the top facing up. I'm going to lay it over here and then just find that hole. It's easier to do it this way than the other way, which is to lay it on there and then try to get the spring, this screw down. This is when we get to the bottom, we're just going to hold it as we secure it. And that's good. Now we will add a little bit of grease to all of these pieces with our fingers, but we're also going to add some oil. And that's because these need to run smoothly as well. I'll even add some oil right there. Remember, grease will slow it down more than oil will, but having that little light protection there is really beneficial on this. Let's go ahead and add some oil just around right there. I don't know if I had it into these holes, so let me go ahead and do that. And that should work. I did forget to add some grease around this. And now we can drop this on, like so. A little bit of oil around it. And if you look at this piece right here, what you're going to see is one tab sticking perpendicular and one going vertical. The flat or horizontal tab will be going down, and it'll be hooking around this little piece right here. Remember, you want this spring under this metal piece right here. You don't need to be inside of it. What will happen is when it curves around, it will tension up under there. Now we'll take this, stick it under and through the hole like so, and then just set it down. And the reason we do that next, or before we put these on, is because this will kind of cover that up. So now we're going to have this plate. It only goes on one way. So we're looking at it like that. Take one of these, secure it with the screw. Before I go all the way down, I will add just a little more oil to right there. And then I'll lock it down. We'll double check it. Now we're going to take this piece, and if you look at it, you see this little notch piece right there. This end of that spring will be going through that. Now basically the setup you're looking for is to have that tab right there on this side of that post, not on this side. However, when you set it up, it will start off on that side, if you see right there. So we're going to do a little bit of a balancing act here and just kind of work it around just to get it over it. And this won't be as tricky as it seems right here. It just takes a little playing to get it. And that's over. Now what just happened there was it raised up over that spring, or over that base of the post, or that sleeve that's over that post right there. So I'm going to push it back so we can get it set properly. We do not, again, want that riding and binding up. So we want that flush. And that's why that screw that goes on top is there. Now that feels like it's in place, and we can always double check it by doing this. You do want to make sure that that top of that sleeve that goes over the post is flush with the post. Now the last piece we have left to put on is this, and the way it'll sit is just like that. And now we can screw it down. And of course, when everything is set, we're going to go ahead and test it just to make sure that everything is working. And we can do it like this, and we can see that it is. You can also look from the side and make sure that that wire is under where we talked about earlier. But just on this fact that we see it working should suffice. All right, now let's get to the rear drag. We're going to grease a couple of things up. As you can see, some of these things are a little shiny. The reason is because I had to refurbish these things to make them work. Didn't want to replace them. Kind of trying to avoid the ratchet, but if you get some grease in there, it's not the end of the world. And this one we're going to grease just the threads. Well, everything, but the threads included. And even the spring right here. This spring has a tendency to just collect a lot of water, be it salt or fresh, and it just sits there. It just sits there in place and eventually just kind of corrodes everything. So we'll add a little bit of grease to this if we wanted to. Do you have to? Not really. These don't see a lot of pressure, but you could. I would just even use some, if I'm going to grease it, just use some of the pen grease to do it versus using some of the dedicated Cal's drag grease, because it doesn't even really need it. All right, so now we're going to take this O-ring, stick that in there, because I don't want to forget it. And sometimes it does happen. I'll take a little bit of grease just to help keep it in place. And if it falls over, just put it back in. Now we're going to work on these pieces here. I'm going to take this, we're going to stick that inside here. But before we, I'm going to take this, we're going to put our plastic washer on top of it, stick it down through there like so, and work on putting the clicker together. The clicker will be these two pieces here. Start over. Now we'll take this and we'll put this little click tongue right there back on. And we're going to take it and drop it inside the slot where the slot on the metal piece is in line with the slot on that black plastic piece. Take our spring, put it around it, hold it or secure it right there, and then just work the spring on each side. And you do want to make sure that it's in the slot on the metal piece, and you can typically tell that it is when it pops out like that. Now we'll take this and stick this through, put the plastic piece on, or the plastic washer, and I will work on our clicker, which will be this black piece and that click tongue. Pinch it to put it inside the plastic piece like that. Then we're going to turn it over and fit it into one of those slots right there. Now I like to take a metal washer, stick it on there like that, just to help support it, but it's not that it's necessary. Set it like that, and then I'm going to take my adjustable wrench and turn it until we hear that click. And that's where we want it. We don't want to go any further than that. Put one of our drag washers on there, take this piece, fit those two tabs in one of those slots. I like to put it over the slot. Then we're just going to push down. And I think we may have knocked it out of place. You can tell if it's knocked out of place sometimes by looking inside the little tabs right there, those little sections. And if you see a spring sticking out, then you know that the metal clicker has slipped out of place. This one hasn't, so we're just going to push it down, looking like that. Now I'll take this drag washer, then the metal keyed washer, put it over it. Let's push it down just to make sure it's set. Feels like it is. And now we're going to take this. The recessed side will be coming up or facing down right now. If that makes any sense. So it'll look like that. But if you turn it over, the recessed side will be facing down. And we're going to go ahead and stick this back in. Now remember, this is left to tighten, or left to go down, excuse me. So we're just going to get it started and then work it down. Stick this spring inside, and now we can stick this over it. You're going to rotate it slightly to have these two tabs fall into those notches right there. Just go gently until it falls in place like so. Now everything is set. We're going to go ahead and secure it with the 3 screws that we have here. Now we go ahead and secure this. And then we're just going to stick it up inside there. We can always test it now. Make sure it's working. We can hear that it is. Now let's go ahead and stick this in. This black piece is keyed to the frame, so you just got to rotate it until it falls in place. Always double check that your washer or your O-ring seal is there. And then we're just going to push this in. Right there. And I want to push up slightly on this because sometimes you need to get this, that piece that secures it back in there. But sometimes what you can do is just tighten it as you push up. and then loosen it. It kind of helps it kind of raise up as much as it needs to go. But the reason that's happening is because that O-ring is in there and it helps push that down. So we kind of squeeze up like this and then stick it under there. And again, you want to make sure that the sides are flat or in line with the frame. So I got to move it over sometimes on one side versus the other. But we see that that's set and looking good. And now we can bottom that out like we just did right there. But I'm going to crank it up slightly again. One thing you want to note for these, whenever you're using them, you don't want to bottom this out the entire way and leave it there, because what happens is that's where it typically will get frozen and it's hard to separate when you service the reel. So whenever you do that, just go up a little crank. Now for this plastic rotor brake, I'm going to add just some normal regular super glue to it. And now we're going to roll it over it. This is the position. Then we're just going to set it down and press it until it sets in place. All right, and when that's set or down, we're going to go ahead and add the screws to it. Just remember, this longer one goes to the side over here. All right, now let's go ahead and stick this arm in. Before I do that, I'm going to add some grease to all over. So I'm going to take this end of the spring right here, stick it in the hole kind of at an angle like that, and then rotating this around. I know I'm blocking it. My apologies. Trying to do so you guys can see it, but I have to get my fingers in there as well. So angle like that, shaft is around like that, and now I'm going to gently rotate that lever end of it up over this little base here and up toward the pinion gear. So you can see that like so. It just drops into place. When you're doing it yourself, it will be fairly simple. To demonstrate how to do it is be difficult because I'm showing or blocking a lot of the parts you may need to see. So hopefully you're able to see all the process that I did there to make that happen. And now if you wanted to, you could cover it up. I will add some grease to that hole right there, some inside there. Just kind of get some lathered on there. And then I'm going to push down on this as I rotate this over it to find the position that it's in. It should be around there somewhere, which it is. And then secure it with the screw. And I like doing this first over having the pinion stack in, because I kind of need to play with this section sometimes to hold on to the body of the reel, so don't want to have that in the way. Now we're going to go ahead and stick one of the bearings inside here, and that's just so we don't forget it. Make sure it goes flush or recessed all the way, which that one is. And now we're going to work on the pinion stack. So I'm going to get this, grease the entire thing up, and it's, as always, just kind of a light coat on this. But we want to grease everything, including those threads at the top. Now we can take one bearing, drop that on there like so. Take this sleeve, got to rotate until it falls in place because it's keyed. And for the anti-reverse clutch, we did remove some of the oil from there. So we're going to add a couple drops, just 1, 2 is all you really need. And I'm going to stick that down on top of it. For this piece, I will add some grease kind of all over that as well. Don't want that bearing getting stuck or frozen inside there. You can drop that in right now and then put that on over it like that. Now I'm going to pinch this down, add some grease all around it, just as one more layer of protection. Take this, drop it in. I'm going to rotate it until it falls in place. Just push down. Then we'll secure it with this cover right here. All right, now onto the post, which will be this right here. Take that and screw that in. Snug it down. And I'm going to add some oil here
not some grease. And since I'm already here, I'm going to add some grease to this. Note that the thinner side, or the side with the groove, is facing down, going towards the main gear, and the empty side, or flat side, is facing up towards the rotor. You can add a little bit of grease around this. And we're going to stick this on first. But if you note, there's a spring that we need to replace. The spring has one end that's straight down or perpendicular to the spring itself, and then one over here that has a hooked end. We're going to drop that over it, and we're going to take this end of the spring, the straight end, down inside that little channel right there. Then we're going to take this, kind of have it over, but we're going to keep this lifted up in the air because we have a little post there until we get over that slot or space on the top of the body right there. We're not going to drop this anti-reverse or backup dog down. And we just got it there, so we did. And then that kind of falls in place right there on top of it. Now we can take our E-clip, lay that on there, and then put it back in. And again, you can use pliers. I like to use my handy dandy flathead screwdriver. Either way works. Just want to make sure it's in place, so I'm going to rotate it and it's not coming off. Then just do a little double check to make sure everything looks good, which this one does. Now we can take this piece, drop it on there, make sure that the pronged or bent end is sticking up towards the rotor. And then we're going to take this plastic actuator right here, and we're going to have that little slot that you see in the middle with that protrusion on the spring sticking up through it. So I'm just going to kind of look at it from the side, find it, drop it over it, and also at the same time dropping this end or that top part of the anti-reverse or backup dog inside that channel. And we can see that this one is set. You'll notice that the spring is sticking up through the hole. That's all you're really looking for. And now we can cover it up with the rotor. We're going to take the rotor, put it on there, and we're going to rotate this until it falls in place because this is keyed. About right there, looks good. Drop that in place. And now we can take our washer, that little flat washer that we took off, fit that on over the pinion, drop it down, and then you can secure it with the screw. Now when we get to the bottom of that nut tightening, we want to line one of those flat sides up to one of these holes over here, or pretty close to it. Now I'm going to take some residual grease, kind of add it to right here, drop this over, and then we want to see or line that up or make sure it's lined up, excuse me, to one of those holes, which this one is not. So we're going to back this up slightly, ever so slightly, and then secure it with the lock screw. Now I'm going to go ahead and speed through this part, but I'm going to grease the main gear, crosswind gear block, and I think that's about it for this. But you will see that I greased the entire surface area of this. The one thing is that here in that channel, we're going to add quite a decent amount of grease, a little bit more than we would on the rest of it. So a little thick lather like so. Now while we're here, we can go ahead and add some grease inside there where the handle will be screwed into. Now we're going to go ahead and lay everything in there. I'm going to take my crosswind gear, drop that on over the post, secure it with this screw. Get that snug down. I'm going to rotate it to make sure it's working, which we see that it is. And now we can take our block, put that little slot right there over the post, like so. Now we can take our main gear, drop that in, kind of rotate it until it falls all the way down, and not to move this block too much. And then we can take our shaft, and at the shaft I'm going to grease right here and right down here, I'm going to thin that out in a sec when I'm finished adding the grease to it, because I don't want that binding up towards the bottom here. So I'm going to kind of lighten that up a little bit. Now I'm just going to stick this through, hold on to the block, and kind of rotate this until it goes through it. And then rotate it to fall in place towards the bottom as well. You're trying to expose those two little slots you see right there on either end of the block, so you can put this piece right here on. Kind of like that. Then you can secure that with the screw. And that's all set. Now we have our gasket that we're going to put on there. I'm going to take a little bit of grease from my fingers, gently work this around, and that should be good. Now we're just going to lay it in there and work it in. I kind of like to start at the top first, but wherever you start, just, you know, use some gentle pressure on it. You're not doing anything crazy. I like to take my little flathead screwdriver and just kind of work it ever so gently inside that little channel that it should sit in. And that looks good. Now we're going to go ahead and take our shims, put those on, and then stick our bearing on there. After I do that, I'm going to cover it up, but I'm also going to feel for something. I want to feel if there's any kind of tension or too much tension when I'm cranking this reel. I'm going to play with this to kind of get that in there, but I'm also going to play with how that side plate sits on top of it. Sometimes you got to pop this down, which in this case it looks like we have to. All right, that looks good. Let's see how this feels. What I'm feeling for here, since we changed the gears out, the main gear and the pinion gear, we want to feel if those shims are too much or just enough for them. If it's too much, we're going to remove some. I'm squeezing as hard as I can, but I do understand that when I put the screws in for the housing, it'll be even tighter. But that feels to me really good. So I think we're in business. All right, so now we'll go ahead and add the outside screws here, and I'll come back to you after that's done. Now let's take this rubber seal, we're going to put it over here. Before we do that, we're going to add some grease to around it. Again, we're just layering protections here is all we're doing. Drop that on over like so. And then we'll take this end, put it over it. Need to have them line up kind of like this, so we'll start in this direction. Then kind of pop those in place. And then we can secure it with the screw. Now we're going to test this to make sure it works properly. We see it going up and down. That's always a good start. And then we're going to turn this to see if it clicks it back up, which it just did. We saw that. Now we're going to go ahead and put this on. And this might be a tight fit or a snug fit for you guys, so just be careful because you don't want to cross thread this. So you want to make sure you're getting that set on there properly. Now we're going to stick this handle in. I want to